the need sufficient and reliant upon myself should worst case scenario ever play out. I realised pretty quickly that I was the foundation that we all once held.
Gordon Deadman tells his students about which wild plants are edible and how they compass or map. These topics have not enthralled Joseph, but has
using your smartphone as a compass thing. You don't realize that you don't need to buy that.
I want to hear.
Oh, that was about to be important. Damn it. You don't get on United Nations TV. I feel like I pressed the SAP button.
I want him to be able to be like, it's okay. No, we're here to prevail.
It's winter time in Australia, so it gets dark early. Supper tonight is kangaroo meat and vegetables.
Bastard.
Joseph is impervious to the romantic charms of campfires and starlit skies in the wild.
Goddamn kangaroo.
I'm warm bed.
Fuck you, motherfucker. You know how much kangaroo costs? At first, I can't afford to get on the bus to go down on Jane Street to the restaurant. Yes, I can buy a kangaroo burger.
Like a lot.
Motherfucker. What I have to pay to get it? No.
They've all survived a bitingly cold night, sleeping bags and bivouacs. They had to keep feeding their fires to ward off the chill. Joseph looks like he's feeling pretty wrecked. Not that he would say so.
It was pretty good. It was enjoyable, yeah. I didn't wake up once, which was a nice change. But yeah, those lovely blankets, like pretty well.
It's the last day and time for the final exam.
Area that you haven't. So you're going to boil a litre of water. You'll have to get it off to the rolling boil. Set your shelter up and set the navigation thing. You're going to have 20 minutes to do that. You have ideally 20 minutes to complete this individually.
Before straws to a close, Joseph starts to warm to the tasks. The father and son team complete their assignments in time.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Wow, sounds directly
20 minutes to start. What?
He's not sweating as much as I am, but you know, that's okay.
I'm younger, more spry than you are.
Here, Mark, stick that in instead.
Gordon is pleased, and Joseph is glad he came along.
I just kept going and I listened to it, and although I didn't take notes because I'm a bit of a silly bugger, yeah, it's great. All the stuff he's taught, it's valuable stuff. It's not like I'm never going to use this. It's like in case of emergency, you got a knife, you got a ferro, and a top, and you could do a bunch.
We can't see the sun.
The final exercise, how to let people know you are there when you are lost.
Wake something up. You have one injured person. You know the number.
3 days of practical training in how to survive in the wild, but also 3 days of personal
I
growth.
can't untie him as fast as somebody else can retie him.
Keep going on to get a picture of you guys.
Tie so many ropes to those cells.
And that's all from us at Global 3000 this week. Do drop us a line and let us know what you thought. You can reach us at global3000@dw.com. See you next time.
We're not going to 3,000. You just needed a number bigger than 2,000. You ran out of fucking numbers.
You tell me
what UNICEF, I'm very pissed off. Vaccines, swear to God.
Leo.
French.
Ben, look, it's only the beginning. He's got the stuff scattered 7 ways for Sunday. We're going to need help.
In the milk
Bottles, yeah, 2 rings, 3 loose diamonds, and this bottle of mayonnaise. We found some kind of a brooch in it. A couple of watches taped to the underside of the kitchen sink.
All right, you convinced?
Okay, Ben, call Backstrand.
It all was set up to me.
There was a definite possibility that Walter Baker, alias Tracy, had stored some of his stolen loot outside his apartment. We stood little chance of ever recovering it unless we got him to break.
Ben called Chief Backstrand, and in 10 minutes he arrived at the apartment with another man from burglary detail, George Levine. Together we went over the four-room apartment foot by foot. We found jewelry, watches, loose stones in every conceivable place. In cartons of cottage cheese, in jars of cold cream, in the garbage can, everywhere.
Who's your girlfriend?
All right, I'll ask her. What's your name?
I said, what is your name?
Billy.
Ooh.
Billy Crawford. He didn't do anything. He didn't.
All right, Billy. Maybe you can tell us. Where's the rest of the stuff he stole?
He didn't steal. He didn't steal anything.
Billy, shut up. Keep quiet, you.
Ed, wait a minute.
What?
Just a minute. I want to look over here.
Papers. Taped to the underside of that top drawer. What is it, Friday?
No, you can't. You can't.
Look at these.
All right, you found them. I'll talk.
No, Walter, don't.
What are all the papers? He's an ex-con. Yeah, I'll cop out.
Don't do it, Walter.
Billy, shut up. Dumb dame.
The rest of the stuff, where is it?
On the roof. Inside the ventilator, the one near the front, you'll find a couple of paper bags. That's it.
Levine? Got it, Chief. I'll check it. Your papers say you did time in Oregon. What for?
Fell for robbery, did 5, I owe him 7.
What about the girl?
Walter, I'm going with you.
Her? I don't know. You figure it.
All right, Friday. Romero, take the girl to Lincoln Heights and book her. We'll take him.
Right, Ed. Come on, Ben.
No, Walter, I want to go with you.
I'm sorry, ma'am. This way out.
Like it's up to him to say,
No,
yeah,
wait
bring
a
him
minute.
in.
Just a minute. Walter.
You're a dumb dame, Billy. So long.
Walter.
All right, come on, let's go. What's the matter? You feel all right?
He lied. He said he loved me.
I think I got a better chance of getting married if I go
Don't feel
to
hurt,
jail.
lady. You lied to
join one of
everybody.
these. It's not type service, I
The story you have just heard is
guess.
true.
Russian bride.
Only the names were changed to protect the innocent. Walter Baker, alias Walter Tracy, was tried and convicted on 3 counts of first-degree burglary and received the maximum sentence prescribed by law. He is now serving out his term in the state penitentiary.
Which is
A hold has been placed on him by the state of Oregon, where he will serve out 7 years for violation of parole. Billy Crawford, Baker's accomplice, was tried and convicted of receiving stolen property and is now serving time in the state penitentiary
she would
for
shut
women.
up.
Thank goodness for Guildhall. Guildhall Precious Metals will put you first with Guild.
So I just have to go down a couple. There we go.
Houses managed by UNICEF regional and country offices. Bulk deliveries are mainly transported by sea, except for vaccines and most emergency shipments, which are sent by air. Vaccines and food supplies are not stored in the warehouse. They're delivered directly from manufacturers.
If you enjoyed tonight's production of Dragnet, you'll
86, 20, 50, 85. This is Newsday.
This is the BBC World Service, and here's what World Book Club have been reading.
The novel is called Nervous Conditions. I'm Harriet Gilbert, and joining me to answer questions about it from BBC listeners around the world. I'd like to know how you came to write that wonderful first sentence.
I was not sorry when my brother died.
Is its prize-winning Zimbabwean author Sisi Nangarembwa.
When I first wrote the book and had finished it, I really didn't.
At a record price of $247,000 more than what the neighbor has sold for. Melissa couldn't believe it was true. If you want great results.
At the specifications and quality needed. Our dispatch of goods follows the same principles, with barcodes that are tracked until delivery. The kit packing lines are staffed by highly trained and experienced warehouse operators. In this section, we have feeding stations where staff pack small items. We also have 2 main packing lines where goods are packed in cartons.
To George Floyd, the African-American man whose killing by police last year sparked nationwide protests. The legislation would ban BBC News with Moira Alderson. The US House of Representatives has passed a police reform bill named after George Floyd, the African-American man whose killing by police last year sparked nationwide protests. The legislation would ban chokeholds, end racial profiling, and establish a database to track police misconduct. The vote on the policing bill was held a day earlier than scheduled because of a potential security threat to Congress linked to the QAnon conspiracy theory. Capitol Police said they had intelligence of a possible plot to breach the building by a militia group. President Biden has criticized the decisions to drop COVID requirements to wear face coverings in states of Texas and Mississippi, saying Neanderthal thinking was the last thing needed. Both states dropped mandatory masks on Tuesday. Mississippi's governor said Mr. Biden should focus on trusting Americans rather than trying to insult them. Germany is changing its stance on the Oxford AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine, recommending its use for people aged 65 and over. The announcement could help speed up the sluggish vaccination campaign. Chancellor Angela Merkel also said Germany would adopt the British approach of stretching the gap between doses. For a third time in succession, a test of an unmanned SpaceX rocket has ended in a fireball. What appeared to be a successful takeoff and landing at the test site in Texas developed into a fiery explosion when the rocket blew up 8 minutes after touchdown. SpaceX, founded by the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk, hopes to send the heavy-lift rocket to Mars. The Duchess of Sussex has suggested the British royal family has been perpetuating falsehoods about her and Prince Harry. In a clip from a forthcoming interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan said that what she called the firm should not expect her to be silent. That's the latest. BBC News.
Thank you very much. Hello, welcome to Newsday with Bola and James. Coming up this half hour, we'll head to Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya and Zambia to tackle stories as diverse as vaccines, electric fishing boats and a debt crisis. And our Ross has all the sports, and it's not particularly good news if you're a Manchester United fan.
But first, we go to shocking developments in the story of the almost 300 schoolgirls who were kidnapped in Nigeria last week. There was much jubilation in Zamfara State when the students' release was secured. That's now turned once again to despair as 3 people were shot at a ceremony yesterday to celebrate the girls' return. Eyewitnesses in the town of Jangebe described how security forces opened fire after parents, frustrated by delays with the ceremony, started throwing rocks at officials. Well, yesterday, the security analyst Donna Ikomo explained to us some of the challenges in keeping school children safe in Nigeria. So we turn to him again now to decipher the latest events. Morning to you. Thank you very much for joining us. So what do you understand? What have you been hearing from officials and otherwise about what happened in Jangebe, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that's a picture of pent-up frustration, first from the abduction of the schoolgirls and citizen anger over the inability of government to obviously protect those kids. And then secondly, the usual ceremonies and the length of them and speeches that, don't really get much done.
You're right.
And independence. They want the skills they acquire to be applied in life. What we do together is to energize that change by creating the environment for young people to not just finish education.
Know his name, Doc?
Not surprisingly, because they wonder why, even if people are expressing frustration.
Security. So there were some VIPs there, and so in protecting the VIPs, that's why the police personnel opened fire on some of the persons that they felt were attacking their VIPs.
Which people, in a sense, are so confused about, I understand, not surprisingly, because they wonder why, even if people are expressing frustration by throwing rocks, when live bullets, live rounds shot at them, if at all any bullets or even rubber bullets, what are people making of it? What are the locals, for instance, in Jangebe saying?
Well, the locals are frustrated. They are angry. They are dispirited because those casualties were not called for. Like you said, there were other means of riot or crowd control that could have been employed rather than resort to live bullets. But if those officers are brought up on charges, they will say they had a duty to protect their VIPs.
It is also saying a lot about the Nigerian authorities and what they give priority to. Here we have almost 300 schoolgirls who were taken from their school, whose parents hadn't seen them, were at their wits' end, you know, despairing at the state of their kids. And when their children were finally brought to them, rather than reuniting them with their families, they were first of all paraded in their blue hijabs before they were sent to their families. Have the authorities said they understand the frustrations of these families and why it may have led to rocks being hurled by youths?
Well, actually, we have a problem trying to understand that too, because there was a ceremony at the government house. First, these kids were moved at about 1 a.m. Into Gusau. They went and had a ceremony at government house, had speeches there. Now, then from there, they were taken for medical examination. And from there, they were brought to Jangebe to be reunited to the parents. Now, it would appear that when they got to the city, to the town, to Jangebe, they would have been immediately reunited with their parents because the parents had been advised to assemble. And but when they got there, we now had another round of speech making, which is what triggered the reaction from the residents of the town. So it's really very, I think it's not, it didn't show a lot of perception of the emotional involvement of these parents in having to reunite with their kids at that time.
Onoye Kumo, thank you very much for joining us this morning. And he's an analyst speaking there live from Nigeria.
Fishermen on Lake Victoria in Kenya have begun using what are being described as some of Africa's first electric fishing boats. The Kenya-based startup is offering battery-powered engines to some of the tens of thousands of boats that go out onto the water each night as a cheaper and greener alternative to petrol ones. The BBC's Leila Nathu reports from the town of Mbita.
How do you charge it?
It's about 6:30 in the morning. The sun's not yet risen, and fishermen are starting to land back on shore with their catch after their night out on the lake. There's a steady stream of them now coming in. You can see their fluorescent life jackets, their lights, their ropes. Buckets of fish are being unloaded. The slippery piles are the fruits of hours spent scouring the lake. Some fishermen, though, like Sevens Odhiambo, have been trying out a new way of getting around, using electric motors.
There is a difference, because with this motor, there are fewer fumes while driving, and the petrol engine vibrates a lot, and the fumes get into your lungs. This is good and works well.
Sevens boat has just come back in now. I can see lots of small little silver fish in their nets. They've obviously caught, and they're just trying to disconnect and offload the motor now. Asobo, a new business based in Kenya, is winning support here by leasing electric engines designed to be cleaner and more affordable than petrol ones. There are hundreds of people here now. It's bustling this morning with people coming to buy fish and welcoming in the boats. Fishing is the main source of income for people living here. Their livelihoods depend on it, so you can see why they would welcome anything that could make it a cheaper and more reliable activity. The previous evening, the wind blew furiously while the fishing boats prepared to take delivery of their electric motors. The batteries arrive fully charged. 2 will power 1 boat for the entire night. Rose Owino owns one of the boats that has switched over. She says the benefits are clear, with no maintenance costs or wasted fuel on trips when fish are scarce. I had a petrol engine, but the problem was it kept on breaking down. But with this one, they repair it themselves. So we can focus on preparing our fishing trips while the rest is covered by them. Even if we don't get any fish, it's not a problem. It's just unlucky. The boats head out to try their luck on that night's trip. So far, the electric engines are powering just a handful of them. But it's thought around 60,000 make similar journeys onto Lake Victoria each night, mainly in search of tiny amena fish. They attract them using floating lamps made from bonded wooden sticks with bulbs attached before casting their nets. But pollution from petrol engines threatens the water they depend on. There's the risk of oil spills, and their emissions are harmful too. And that's why Laurence Frissot, who runs Asobo, wants his electric engines to take off here.
We need, as humanity, to change our ways of using energy and get away from fossil fuels.
The next morning, we go out with him into the wide expanse of the lake, where the boat barely makes a sound. He says technological progress means now is the moment to act.
So battery technology storage is becoming more affordable by the day. Appliances, like an engine, a motor like this, are becoming better by the day, more reliable, higher performing. So we think all these paths, they come together now, and this is a really good spot to start.
And there's plenty of room to expand on Africa's largest lake.
Leila Neto reporting there from Lake Victoria.
This is Newsday on the BBC World Service, and some of our top headlines this morning. The US House of Representatives has passed a police reform bill named after George Floyd, whose killing sparked an outcry against police racism and brutality. Also in the US, President Biden has criticized the governors of Texas and Mississippi for ending the requirement to wear masks, saying it will set back the fight against coronavirus. And Chancellor Merkel says Germany will now recommend the AstraZeneca shot for older people as it seeks to boost its sluggish coronavirus vaccination campaign. And now let's get all the latest sports news with Alvos.
Thanks, Paula. Manchester City have moved ever closer to the...
Where is he?
The genres. After managing cancer, we go into the desert of doom. We climb up the cliff. We go into this cave. And always the treasure is something that me and my little sister really like pretty stones and stuff. My dad also puts 2 sweeties for each other. My mama and my papa also read a lot of books to us. A lot of books. I don't like lockdown because I don't get to see my friends. I don't get to go to school. I don't get to go anywhere that I love. But not.
And you'll find my email address immediately. In a moment, Shane Hewitt with what's coming up next hour. This is Charles Hampton tonight.
Love the thrill of a real mystery? Then you'll love the podcasts available from CBC, like Brainwashed. Their objective was to wipe my memory. Evil by Design. Peter Nygaard is the most prolific sexual offender to date. Uncover. Escaping NXIVM. What is mind control? Is it possible that someone could control someone else's mind? And someone knows something. There was a scream in the film like that. Listen to critically acclaimed true crime podcasts from CBC. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever.
First female engagement team in DRC. We are the 17 lady officers distributed at various places, Veera, Sangay and Kugumu, and we are 5 lady officers here at RDB 4 Sangay. teachers are running these programs in their schools. I have been trained in various psychotherapies, specifically in trauma management. So when I came here,
Can someone help me through this?
And this woman right here. How do I connect the two of you?
I designed a
whole... No. Ah, damn it.
Cut it out. Yeah, I know. That's why I can't tell you who he is. What kind of a lawman are you, anyway? I've told you all I can, Jake. No, you haven't. Marshal, I don't believe your story about nobody. Promise nothing. You know who done it. And you're going to tell me or I'm... try it, Jake. You can't kill me, and you know it. No, I can't. Me and my boys can. And I'm giving you 24 hours to name those men, and then we're coming to Dodge. There'll be blood spilt, Marshal.
Jake, I give you my word, I don't know who did it.
I don't believe you.
I'll help you take your boy home now.
Go on back to Dodge. I'll manage here.
You're making a bad mistake, Jake.
People drank themselves to sleep listening to that
I'm going to their houses, meeting them to understand their culture so that we can provide them the psychological services according to them. We peacekeeper themselves, we are away from our homes and we are here, we are daily basis, we are interacting with the traumatized individuals. So I used to run certain stress management program for my own people, for myself as well.
I definitely want to stay home as such.
That is Liz Mills, the head coach of the Kenya men's basketball team. We'll keep an eye on them at Afro Basket, which starts in August.
Can you imagine a more unfair competition than trying to go up against the Kenyan basketball team?
Newsday on the BBC World Service, Ghana became the first country outside India to receive COVID-19 vaccine doses shipped via the COVAX facility. COVAX, you may recall, is an initiative aimed at providing equitable access to COVID vaccines across the world. Now, vaccination in Ghana and Ivory Coast next door is underway. Joining us now is Gregory Roxon, co-founder and CEO of M-Pharma, a Ghanaian healthcare company, which was involved in the early days of the pandemic in making COVID testing more accessible through partnerships with private labs, and will have a role in getting Ghanaians vaccinated too. Hi, Gregory. So how's the vaccination campaign going so far?
So far, so good. We kicked off the program on Tuesday, and the country is currently focused on vaccinating frontline health workers and people above the age of 60.
And those frontline healthcare workers, and certainly older people, all around the country, often in quite remote places, are there particular challenges in getting vaccines to them?
I think the first focus has been centered around the three major regions that have seen the highest number of cases. So I think that when we are looking at the Greater Accra, Shanti, and Western regions, those are not very remote regions. There are remote areas in those regions. So it hasn't been, I would say, that challenging. But as we sort of move towards more far remote areas, I think we're going to encounter logistics problems, particularly around the cold chain delivery.
Yeah, cold chain delivery, keeping those vaccines at the right temperature. You were involved in helping get testing around the country. Are there lessons you can bring from that that might inform how the vaccination step could be done?
Yes, I think the first thing we learned from testing was that we cannot ignore Africa's private healthcare sector. So at the end of the day, the private healthcare sector is one of the largest providers of care. And also, when we want to look at long-term sustainable impact, we need to make sure that it is deeply integrated into the care and services that the private sector offers. Today in Ghana, as an example, the private healthcare sector accounts for over 60% of all the testing that is being done. In addition, it enabled the government to then save its own money and resources to focus.
Save money how? Because of the private sector, presumably, is charging.
Yes, but the government could now focus its resources on the poor and vulnerable, whilst those who could afford it went and got it in the private sector.
But are you going to get a sort of two-speed sort of system where rich people get access to vaccines quickly, perhaps, and the poor will take more time?
That could happen if there are no controls put in place. What we did was to actually leverage domestic financing from those who could afford to pay for it, to actually mobilize resources to support additional testing in the public sector. So actually, because of this program on the testing, we were able to set up about 5 additional mobile testing units in public laboratories, which were doing tests for free. So you can always mobilize domestic financing. Think of how COVAX was created. COVAX was created based off on rich countries.
Yeah, so
investing more money.
There's money there
to help poor countries.
Exactly. From M-Pharma. Thank you.
Now, Zambia is up to its eyeballs in debt, and late last year it was unable to pay for all the loans it took over the years and defaulted on its external debt, a first for any African nation since the pandemic began. Well, Zambia has been speaking to the International Monetary Fund, hoping to get some sort of bailout, but the clock is ticking, and people have already started feeling the pinch. So how did things get so bad? Well, that's what Newsday's Alan Kasujo has been looking into for today's episode of the Africa Daily podcast.
The Ministry of Finance has requested Eurobond holders to defer interest service payments.
Look, I get it. It can be hard to get your head around these really complicated stories about economics. But let's take this one step at a time, shall we? First of all, if you're in Zambia right now, what do these headlines actually mean to people? I got my team to collect a couple of testimonies to get a sense of what's at stake here.
It's very difficult to budget for things now. Anything that I would want to buy, you'll find that in the next 2 or 3 days, the prices has gone up. And so budgeting is not even guaranteed anymore. Like you can put a budget and it's not guaranteed anymore that you're going to get the item at that price.
To be very honest, the things are very tough even here in Anaconda. What we've done as a family is we're 7. We've made some adjustments in the way we eat. For example, breakfast has now become our lunch, and lunch is now supper. And because the price of cooking oil has also gone up, some meals that require using cooking oil, we have suspended that for now until such a time that things will get better. I'm just not sure when that will happen.
So we've got the prices that are going up. People are struggling to stretch their salaries, struggling to pay their bills, and there's clearly some uncertainty about the future. But why is that exactly? Time to give Trevor Hambai a call. He's a financial analyst based in Lusaka.
For 2020, our economic projection is that the economy was going to contract by between -4% to -5%. This was driven on 2 fronts, and this is basically the fact that we had the pandemic hit the country in March. But more importantly, before this, is that the country's economic projection was already contracting. The factors that have been driving this, firstly and foremost, has been the sustainable debt contraction.
So you got the economy slowing down, and not just because of the pandemic. No, problems were already there before COVID, and perhaps the biggest one of all was debt.
What it means is that we have contracted debt, external debt, at a rate faster than we can repay back. So really the country is carrying a $12 billion external debt. And this is really what has driven the country
into the quagmire that it is at the moment.
$12 billion. That is a lot of money.
The biggest challenge that we have with that debt is that there's a very big component of it that is commercial. We've got $3 billion in euro bonds, which we got from the capital market, and 6.7 billion is debt we have acquired from the Chinese. If you look at 2015 to now, the amount of money that we pay external parties in servicing our debt has increased from $300 million to $1.5 billion a year. And that is what is constraining the country's economic growth.
Because, of course, if a government, any government, has to spend that much money paying its debts, it just won't have enough green to put on all those things that matter to you, whether that's schools, hospitals, roads, you name it.
Prior to this, most African countries had debt that was given to them by multilateral partners, which is the IMF, the World Bank, and bilateral partners, which is government to government. This type of debt was concessional in cost, that they were paying very low interest rates on it, between 2 to 3% in terms of interest, and the loans were long term, usually around 20 years in terms of repayment. Commercial debt is a 10-year bond, so it is relatively a short term, but also it is at a commercial rate that we have been paying from around 9%, but it did get to as high as 18% because it is dependent on perspectives of the commercial market, so that if we are perceived as a high-risk country, that interest is going up, and this has been the pain that the country has been carrying.
In other words, if the people lending you money feel you're less likely to pay, we're talking banks, private creditors, if they feel they're taking a risk, then they'll make it more expensive for you to get a loan. You see how this can quickly spiral out of control, right?
Predatory lending.
I know it's hard, but I wonder whether Trevor is feeling hopeful. So when you speak with your peers, with your friends who do what you do, who studied the stuff that you studied, who are as smart as you are,
one side and 5 on the other,
and you try to gauge how messed up or how much trouble the Zambian economy is in, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is very bad, where do you put it?
9.9.
Zambia is talking to the International Monetary Fund, and they're trying to get some sort of bailout that might help the country get back on its feet. Meanwhile, the Zambian government says it's already taking steps to deal with the problem. But most importantly, they say it's not easy to solve these issues when you are, on top of everything else, also fighting a pandemic.
And that was Alan Kasuja, and you can hear more on that in our daily podcast, Africa Daily Podcast. If you want to listen, go to where you get your usual podcast and subscribe.
Very, very dry.
A BBC World Service and American Public Media co-production with iHeartMedia.
What attracts one person to another? Does having too many choices make us less likely to be happy? I'm Dessa, and I'm finding out why you do what you do.
When you give people too much of a good thing, instead of being liberated by it, get paralyzed.
First up, dating.
Why do you fall for him or her?
Deeply Human. Sunday at 10 GMT. And at 8:30 GMT, Business Daily with Manuela Zaragoza.
We're looking at what the past year of COVID has been like for healthcare workers, revisiting those we met at the start of the pandemic. An ICU doctor, a geriatrician, a care home worker. It's a story of anxiety, burnout, and surprisingly, poetry too.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Old people echoes in the like broken telephone in the long-term care home I'm going to.
Hello and welcome to Newsday on the BBC World Service with Bola Mosuru and James Cochran.
The US House of Representatives has passed a police reform bill named after George Floyd that would ban chokeholds and end racial profiling. if approved by the Senate, will radically change the way American police operate.
Also, 10 years after the protests against the Assad regime in Syria started, we hear the story of one man who lost relatives and his home in the war that followed. He went from translating Shakespeare to demining the country.
Over 500 million doses of Chinese COVID vaccines are going out to almost 50 countries. But how good are they in comparison with other vaccines, which offer high protection and are in more limited supply?
Compared to the Russian one.
And the letter posted back in 1697 and only now read, but without ever being opened. How is
They're
that
the people the
possible?
government's
We'll
most
hear more, but
terrified
first
of.
the
That's
latest
the one I want. They came up with Siberian ginseng.
Hello, I'm Laura Alderson with the BBC News. The US House of Representatives has passed a police reform bill named after George Floyd, the African-American man who was killed by police last year, sparked nationwide protests. The legislation would ban chokeholds and end racial profiling. The Democratic Congressman, Jerry Nadler, told a news conference that change was much needed.
Even if some believe the national conversation has moved on since last summer's events, the need to act is just as urgent today. It no longer makes headlines, but every day too many people, disproportionately Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people, people living in poverty, and people with disabilities face harassment and sometimes violence
What's the problem
at the hands of too many law enforcement officers.
The bill must still be approved by the Senate before President Biden can sign it into law. President Biden has criticized the decisions to stop COVID requirements to wear face coverings in the states of Texas and Mississippi, saying that Neanderthal thinking was the last thing needed. Both states dropped compulsory mask wearing on Tuesday. Here's David Willis.
Citing his administration's efforts to ramp up the vaccination program, President Biden said the U.S. was on the cusp of changing the nature of the pandemic. But with more than 511,000 people here having already died of the virus, he said the premature easing of basic health guidelines could lead to many more deaths. As well as lifting the mask mandate, the governors of Texas and Mississippi also announced plans for businesses to reopen, a move that Mr. Biden branded a big mistake.
Chancellor Angela Merkel has said that Germany is changing its stance on the Oxford AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine and will now recommend its use for people aged 65 and over. France made the same change earlier this week after data from Britain showed the vaccine was highly effective in protecting the elderly. Mrs. Merkel also said Germany would adopt the British approach of stretching the gap between the two doses. The Austrian Chancellor, Sebastian Kurz, and the Prime Minister of Denmark, Mette Frederiksen, are travelling to Israel today to discuss the common production of vaccines against coronavirus mutations.
There's growing frustration in a number of European countries about the slow rollout of vaccines. Mr. Kurz said that while the EU's vaccine procurement had been right in principle, the European Medicines Agency had been too slow to approve coronavirus vaccines. And he criticised supply bottlenecks from pharmaceutical companies. Austria, he said, should not be solely dependent on the EU for future vaccines. Now he and his Danish counterpart are travelling to Israel, where they're expected to agree on common production of second-generation vaccines.
BBC News.
That's really how it should work.
A new study has found that nearly all of the world's COVID-19 deaths are happening in countries with high rates of obesity. The research by the World Obesity Federation says that almost 90% of the 2.5 million deaths were in countries with more than half of the population overweight. It says that if obesity had been tackled before the coronavirus outbreak, hundreds of thousands of lives could have been saved. The Duchess of Sussex has suggested that the British royal family has been perpetuating falsehoods about her and Prince Harry. In a clip of an interview with Oprah Winfrey, which has just been released ahead of the broadcast, Meghan said what she called the firm should not expect her to be silent. On Wednesday, royal officials said they would investigate allegations that Meghan bullied staff at Kensington Palace before she and Harry moved to Los Angeles. A judge in Canada has handed multiple murder convictions to a man who drove a van into pedestrians in Montreal in 2018, killing 10 people one by one and injuring another 16. Alec Minassian faces a mandatory 25-year jail term. Catherine Riddell was one of those injured in the attack.
It was the best I could hope for. I think it was a fair
decision, and he can spend the rest of his life in jail because he deserves it. I'm sorry he took lives and he didn't care. And you know what? You just have to be accountable for what you do, and he's going to have to be.
For the third time in succession, a test of an unmanned SpaceX rocket has ended in a fireball. What appeared to be a successful takeoff and landing at the test site in Texas developed into a fiery explosion when the rocket blew up 8 minutes after touchdown. SpaceX, founded by the billionaire entrepreneur Elon Musk, hopes to send the heavy-lift rocket to Mars. That's the latest BBC News.
Thank you for that, and welcome to Newsday with Paula and James. The US, Syria, and China. That's where the next half hour will take us. Also, how scientists at one of the world's best-known universities have been able to read a 300-year-old letter without opening it. If you want to get in touch, look for BBC World Service on Facebook or Twitter, or you can send us a text. Our number is +44 77 86 20 50 85.
The killing of George Floyd last year has led to a landmark bill which, if finally passed by the US Senate, promises to change policing in the country. The 47-year-old African-American was killed after a policeman, Derek Chauvin, knelt on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. His death sparked widespread protests in the United States against police brutality against black and minority populations. And his killing and that of other victims like the 26-year-old Breonna Taylor also led to calls against racial profiling. Well, the BBC's Reagan Morris joins us now from Los Angeles. Morning to you, Reagan. What kind of reforms, tell us more about this bill and what exactly it's specifying, please?
Bill, it would overhaul policing in the United States. It would ban police from using chokeholds. It would get rid of qualified immunity, which is what law enforcement officers, they're protected if they do commit a crime. And this bill would make police officers much more accountable. It does not slash police budgets, although that is how Republicans are describing it, as an anti-police bill that would destroy police budgets. And they're painting it that way as a Democratic attempt to defund the police. And it's interesting, today it passed today is the 30th anniversary of the beating of Rodney King here in Los Angeles. And it's, that was a moment 30 years ago that really started people talking about police reform and racial profiling in the United States. It was the first time that there was evidence. The African Americans said, this is the first time that there's evidence that people can see what happens to our community. And there weren't riots after the video was shown. There were riots after the police officers in it were not held accountable and that they were acquitted in court.
And we know even just last year, it's not just George Floyd or Breonna Taylor. There were so many others, including Daniel Tood, who was, I think he have mental health issues before he ended up being stopped and then ended up dying at the hands of police. And yet not much has been done to some of these police who perpetrated these crimes or whose hands these people died at. So how much of a demand has there been for this kind of reform?
I think there's a huge amount of demand for police reform. I think probably more so than ever. After the protest, some would say an uprising across the United States over the summer. And there's more and more support, according to opinion polls, for it. But it's tricky. People defund the police. People want the police to come if they're in trouble. So it's a really complicated issue. And if you look at how Congress voted today, it was straight down party lines. 2 Democrats voted against it. 1 Republican did vote for the bill, but then apologized and said it was an accident and he hit the wrong button. So it has to go to the Senate, and the chances of it passing in the Senate are pretty grim unless they really restructure it and can reach some bipartisan support. But as of right now, it's right down the middle, and the Democrats don't have enough support to pass it. But I think there is an appetite for reforms, even within the police. They don't want that qualified immunity. I don't want to say that, but I think there's a lot of frustration in police forces in America's big cities that they're being asked to deal with mental illness and people living on the streets. And I think they'd like to see maybe some restructuring as well.
And with Joe Biden now in power, is that going to make
They
any
seem to
difference
think
in
they're
terms of the
experts
kind
on
of rhetoric we
quote-unquote
hear
mental
from
illness.
government? Could it then translate to communities, or even to the police force themselves to reform internally, even if this bill isn't passed and is defeated in the
Just
Senate?
wake up. The first words he says
I
to me
think
are,
that's
"You're
likely. I mean,
making
there
me
are
concerned for
already
your mental
more than a dozen, I was
health."
counting, police forces across the U.S. that do ban chokeholds. So there are some reforms
First thing he's
happening.
going to say to me, so this
And
becomes
the
a
federal
mental
government
health
really
call.
doesn't have that. Policing in the United States is mostly a local issue. It's state and city, and it's a local thing. So I think it will get people talking, and ultimately, if corporate America gets on board, then the culture changes and people want to, if everyone starts talking about police reform in the United States, people get behind it.
The cops.
Reagan, thank you very much indeed. Our correspondent Reagan Morris there.
10 years ago, Syrians rebelled en masse against the rule of Bashar al-Assad. Government forces responded with brutality. The conflict has now killed hundreds of thousands of people, tens of thousands of children among them. Here we'll bring you the story of one man, Saeed. His experience of personal loss, of hunger, and of displacement mirrors that of millions of Syrians. And a warning, some listeners may find parts of this report distressing. BBC's Caroline Hawley has been talking to Saeed.
Is that like disturbing?
Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate.
Shakespeare brings back happy memories for Saeed.
Gods of Maine, and summer's lease hath all too short a day.
He studied English literature at Damascus University and then got his dream job in a dubbing studio.
In 2010, everything was really great.
And then in 2011, the uprising against President Bashar al-Assad began.
At first, people took the streets just calling for freedom, nothing else.
Saeed didn't join the protests.
I was afraid that this country might be destroyed. We can lose everything, but people were just dreaming about freedom. And even my father.
Saeed's father was arrested for supporting the revolution. Like many thousands of other Syrian prisoners, he, along with one of Saeed's cousins, was killed in jail. Protesters on the streets were being gunned down too. And as the death toll mounted, so did the rebellion. The regime resorted to ever more brutal tactics. It was the horror of a chemical attack on the outskirts of Damascus that forced Saeed finally, he says, to take sides.
I was with my wife. The night when they used the chemical weapons, she started to vomit at midnight and said, I smell something so horrendous. And in the morning, we heard the news that hundreds of people were killed.
The attack was on the nearby rebel-controlled district of Eastern Ghouta. Its terrified people attempted to flee. Saeed was actually trying to get in, negotiating his way through military checkpoints. The rebels put him to work teaching English.
I lived with them under the starvation, the bad conditions there. You can imagine that we don't have, for example, bread. Also, rats invaded the fields and ate all the crops. We had to share with them each piece of corn, half eaten by the rat.
And the bombs kept falling. In September 2014, as he was out in the market, Saeed was hit by a mortar shell. He had 3 operations on his leg without anaesthetic and was bedridden for 7 months.
Can you imagine that I am in the operations room, just feeling the surgeon while he was piercing through the bones? Plenty of people were missing a leg, an arm, maybe an eye, something mutilated.
To all mankind, they were addressed. Those cries for help still ringing in our ears.
For Saeed, Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot seemed to summarize life in Eastern Ghouta.
This feeling of the absurd, that there is no hope, no light at the end of the tunnel, and you might die at any moment. That was the situation.
Eventually, in the spring of 2018, the regime's siege had defeated the rebels of eastern Ghouta. Along with fighters and their families, Saeed was evacuated by bus to Idlib in the northwest of Syria. He's one of more than 10 million Syrians displaced by the country's conflict. More than 5 million of them, including his mother and siblings, are now refugees. But Saeed is proud to still be on Syrian soil. He now works for the demining charity the Halo Trust, warning of the dangers of unexploded ordnance. In camps for displaced Syrians, families often scavenge for scrap metal and pick up cluster munitions by mistake, leading to deaths and injuries, even where the fighting has stopped.
Still, we are in a state of chaos here. Nothing is organized. So you keep working, you keep trying to live your life. Maybe millions of the Syrian people have lived through what I have been through.
And Saeed ending that report by Caroline Hawley.
And you're listening to Newsday on the BBC World Service, and one of our top headlines today is that the Chancellor Merkel in Germany says the country will recommend the AstraZeneca shot for older people as it seeks to boost its sluggish coronavirus vaccination campaign. And now we have the latest sports headlines with Al Ross.
And Manchester United lost more ground in the Premier League title race after a third straight goalless draw, this time to Crystal Palace. It's been 5 hours of football since United last scored. Leicester's 1-1 draw against Burnley means they...
The Lux Radio Theatre. And a delightful musical comedy, Somebody Loves Me. Now the second act of Gunsmoke.
Baseline forecasts is see about 10% growth in the average selling price for 2021. We're actually, above that mark right now. On the whole, we do expect to see double-digit price growth in home prices this year in the GTA.
Feinstat doesn't see the demand diminishing in Vancouver, which is too bad for his buyers.
It can be pretty discouraging when, again, you're going up against 14 other offers.
What a difference a year makes. Before the pandemic, sales were dropping. The economics of supply and demand are clearly at play in 2021. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
The economics of my house isn't big enough because I see my partner too often is definitely at play in 2021. Everybody's looking to move. So if you were buying 4 weeks ago, you were way ahead of the curve. Nicely done. Former military ombudsman Gary Walburn says that in 2018, Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan refused to look at evidence of sexual misconduct allegations against General Jonathan Vance. Mercedes Stevenson looks at how this testimony contradicts Sajjan's previous statements and the potential impact on Sajjan and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.
Now to Ottawa and some contradictory evidence at a Defense Committee hearing examining allegations of inappropriate behavior by former Chief of the Defense Staff, General Jonathan Vance. A key question is, what did Defense Minister Harjit Sajjan know and when? Our Ottawa Bureau Chief, Mercedes Stevenson, broke this story about the allegations against Vance. Mercedes, a former military ombudsman, appeared before the committee today. What did he say?
I'm getting confused.
Well, Donna, he says that he approached the Minister of National Defense with serious allegations of sexual misconduct against the former Chief of the Defense Staff, General Jonathan Vance, 3 years ago on March 1st of 2018. He says that he was so concerned by what he saw, he thought the minister should know. But listen as he describes to what the minister refused to accept as what he called incontrovertible and concrete evidence of that sexual misconduct.
I reached into my pocket to show him the evidence I was holding, and he pushed back from the table, said no, and I don't think we exchanged another word. I did offer to shake his hand at the end of the meeting and said, please do get back to me with some advice to tell me what I should do with this.
Donna, Minister Sajjan is a former homicide investigator and police officer, so the news that he pushed back from the table, as the former ombudsman alleges, and refused to look at this evidence is significant. It also contradicts what the minister has publicly said about becoming aware of these allegations in the press. Global News is aware of the evidence that was in that envelope, according to multiple sources. It was the email chain we previously reported between the previous chief of the defense staff and a then corporal propositioning her allegedly to go to a clothing removing optional beach. Now, when we look at all of this, the question is what more could have been done? And the Ombudsman says the defense minister didn't do nearly enough, in his opinion. Here's what he had to say about that.
This was tossed like a hot potato. I think there were a multitude of options available. Discussion, the minister could have met with the victim. That may have been a possibility. The victim may have filed a formal complaint. He, I'm sure, had more options than I had.
Mercedes, what does this mean then for the defense minister and for the prime minister?
Well, people are questioning whether he can stay on if a government that presents itself as feminist and saying we believe women refuse to look at somebody's allegations in that envelope and refuse to actually have a look at them and do something. Although he did email the Privy Council office, that was it. We asked the Prime Minister's office tonight if they still have confidence in the minister, and this is what they said. Of course the Prime Minister has confidence in the minister. We also asked Minister Sajjan's office about this just before we went to air. They got back to us saying that he disagrees with parts of the testimony at committee and that he was shocked, as everyone else was, when those allegations became public last month through Global News. Donna?
Thank you, Donna. Donna's popular on the show. We should actually just have Donna on one day. That would be nice. We should bring Donna on.
We love Donna.
Right. We'd be like, Donna, every question I ask her, I'd be like, so how do you like doing TV, Donna?
Donna? I hear Donna 5 times a day, every day, all the time. So it makes sense that we bring her on. And I'd like to ask her what it's like to hear your name said so many times in the same context.
Donna.
Just like that, by every reporter ever.
Cost-cutting measure.
In BC, the Cullen Commission into money laundering, former VIP gambler and a former dealer testified about stacks of cash and chips being casually passed between players in casino VIP rooms at BC casinos. John Waugh reports.
So?
Hundreds of thousands of dollars in casino chips wrapped in cellophane. A stack worth $100,000 passed off to another player in plain view of staff. High rollers taking chips to a hotel room after no play at all. Just some of the new casino surveillance video obtained by Global News.
I would call myself being crazy with gambling. The amount to lose or win from several thousands to several tens of thousands.
Keeley telling the Cullen Commission through an interpreter what she saw not only as an Edgewater casino dealer, but a VIP player as well.
I noticed that everyone was doing that, passing chips. Well, if everyone was doing that, and no supervision, therefore, I started to do that as well.
Lee, who also went by the name Coco, revealing that despite being known as a dealer and declaring herself as a housewife, River Rock Management granted her access to exclusive VIP salons.
My VIP card, I requested it, and they provided it to me.
It was in those high roller rooms Lee told the commission she would befriend big-time players who would often give her tips, let her play with their chips, or lend her cash.
They would tell me, the money that I loaned to you, forget about it. That was a gift for you.
In exchange, Lee said she would run errands for these generous VIPs, including driving them to and from the airport and picking up packages on their behalf.
He would go to washroom, make phone calls, and then soon after, he would say, Coco, go down and help me to pick up something.
The pickup often just outside the front lobby of the River Rock Casino.
That person through the window handed me the bag and left.
Lee told the commission on only a few occasions was she aware it was cash in the bag, but also stated she often didn't ask.
If you accompany these big bosses, if you talk too much, they wouldn't like it.
Her experience as both a dealer and player did make Lee aware of suspected loan sharks at casinos.
I know that a lot of VIPs, when they gamble, they would get money from the loan sharkers.
In 2015, Lee was asked to meet with the gaming regulator after investigators linked her to $1.4 million in cash transactions at the River Rock in just 1 week.
I wanted to force myself to quit gambling.
Hours after that call, Lee offered her resignation
as a casino dealer.
$200,000 a day.
John Waugh, Global News.
Why wouldn't you be there every day? Look at all
That story continues to turn and turn and turn, and I find it so amazing with all the evidence. Now, I'm not a judge, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems so incredibly amazing that this is even really a discussion at this point. Wow. Yeah, there was stuff happening. Fix it. Give somebody some trouble. I don't know. I'm Shane Hewitt. How about a story about long lost friends? Do you have any friends that you lost and reconnected with from long, long ago? Maybe it was a college buddy from 4 or 5 years ago that you lost contact with that isn't on social media. Maybe it was a long lost school friend from the 50s or the 60s that you found on Facebook. What if there's a story that goes further than that? Really cool, feel good, man, do friends ever matter kind of story. Coming up for you next, it's The Shift. I'm Shane Hewitt.
It's dark out, but we'll keep the lights on. It's The Shift with Shane Hewitt.
Last season, the world of Big Brother came crashing down from the rubble.
Found in this trunk, this extraordinary trunk of undelivered letters that resides in the Sound and Vision, The Hague, over in the Netherlands. And in that trunk is 2,600 letters that were never delivered. Back then, you had to pay, the recipient paid for their mail. So for some reason, these postmaster and postmistress kept the trunk and called it their piggy bank. And among those letters is this letter from Jacques. And he's written, it sounds like twice, and he's urgently trying to get this certificate for tax purposes. And he's basically just like begging his cousin, like sounds like he's requested this letter twice. And of course, this trunk called the Brienne trunk is full of letters that were never delivered. And Jacques made the most beautifully intricate pattern of writing it, folding his letter, and it took 8 steps, and it has a beautiful flapping technology. And we can study that from the virtual unfolding.
Wow, so that beautiful technology, 8-fold, presumably made it harder to decipher than a conventional modern-day letters would have been.
You know, these letters can be 12 layers of paper and ink on both sides of those in a tiny area, and then 2 in others because of the way the layers are all compacted and fold to become this teeny tiny letter packet. It's like 3 inches by 4 inches or something. So it's fascinating that they are really studying the air. They're studying like how they can calculate the air between these paper layers and how tell the algorithm. This algorithm needed to be robust so it can read any folded letter is the hope.
Isn't that amazing?
Well,
reading a letter without opening it. Witchcraft.
It's wiretapped.
No, that was Janet Ambrosio. She's got a much more scientific and rational explanation. She's from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Knows what letters they'll read from now on. You're listening to Newsday.
I'm not doing all of these right now.
This is the BBC World Service, looking at how COVID has reversed long-term trends for American women.
In 1 year, the pandemic has put decades of the progress we've collectively made for women workers at risk.
Kamala Harris becoming vice president marked a progressive milestone in gender employment and representation, but the economic crisis has caused huge losses across the female workforce.
The women tended to occupy a lot of the jobs that were hit hardest.
I'm Netta Tawfiq, and I'll be discovering how it has restricted their careers.
Guess who's more likely to be working and responsible for childcare in this pandemic? Mom.
And the long-term impact.
Will employers remember that there was a year when we had to put everything on hold?
The Empty Desk, Women, COVID, and the U.S. Economy.
Tuesday at 9:20 GMT.
Hello,
Welcome to Newsday from the BBC World Service with James Copnell and me, Bola Musuro.
This half hour, we're live in Nigeria, where a ceremony to welcome back the released schoolgirls turned violent, with the security forces opening fire on the crowd.
It's confirmed obesity leads to more deaths from coronavirus, according to a new report.
A little sign of the Rainbow Nation, South Africa's version of the Love Island TV series is facing questions over its life.
BBC News with Moira Alderson. The US House of Representatives has passed a police reform bill named after George Floyd, the African-American man whose killing by police last year sparked nationwide protests. The legislation would ban chokeholds, end racial profiling, and establish a database to track police misconduct. The vote on the policing bill was held a day earlier than scheduled because of a potential security threat. Capitol Police said they had intelligence of a possible plot by a militia group to breach the building, apparently in expectation that Donald Trump would be restored to the presidency on Thursday. President Biden has criticized the decisions to drop COVID requirements to wear face coverings in the states of Texas and Mississippi, saying Neanderthal thinking was the last thing needed. Both states dropped mandatory masks on Tuesday. Mississippi's governor said Mr. Biden should focus on trusting Americans rather than trying to insult them. Germany is changing its stance on the Oxford-AstraZeneca coronavirus vaccine, recommending its use for people aged 65 and over. The announcement could help speed up its vaccination campaign. Chancellor Angela Merkel also said Germany would adopt the British approach of stretching the gap between doses. For a third time in succession, a test of an unmanned SpaceX rocket has ended in a fireball. What appeared to be a successful takeoff and landing in Texas developed into a fiery explosion 8 minutes after touchdown. SpaceX hopes to send the heavy-lift rocket to Mars. The Duchess of Sussex has suggested that the British royal family has been perpetuating falsehoods about her and Prince Harry. In a clip from a forthcoming interview with Oprah Winfrey, Meghan said that what she called the firm should not expect her to be silent. BBC News.
Thank you very much. Hello, welcome to Newsday. Bola and James with you. We'll start in Nigeria in just a moment. We'll also look at the controversy that surrounds South Africa's version of Love Island. Why did it take public protests for the organisers to bring in participants from a diverse range of backgrounds? And performing in a bubble, a real plastic bubble. We'll hear from the American band who found an unusual way of continuing to go on stage during the pandemic.
We start in Nigeria, where there's been shock and anger after 3 people were shot at while what should have been a celebratory reunion of the families of nearly 300 schoolgirls in Zamfara state who'd been kidnapped last week. Security forces opened fire when, in frustration at the ceremony dragging on for too long, the authorities were pelted with rocks and missiles. Well, the incident was followed by a rapid departure of government officials from the town of Jangibe. Joining us now is the BBC's Mayeni Jones, who's in Lagos. Morning to you, Mayeni. So what more can you tell us about events in the town, please?
Morning, Bola. It sounds like it was a very confusing and emotional moment as these girls were finally waiting to be reunited with their parents. Different information is coming out about the number of casualties, but from what we understand now from multiple sources is that there was a handover ceremony of the girls to a local chief, and that ceremony lasted a bit too long. We've seen it several times with previous kidnappings, quite long speeches by officials who really want to celebrate the moment. And parents who were frustrated at the length of the ceremony, but also it appears worried that they would have to return home late in the dark, started losing patience. And in the dispute that followed, some shots were fired by security operatives. We believe 3 people might be injured, but we're not sure on the number of dead.
And this is at a time when people have been calling for more protection at schools, that security should be beefed up because they know Boko Haram or other bandits now target them. And sometimes the bandits are doing this for money. Did the government, before they had this major ceremony, talk about that? Because that's also what the families wanted to see, as well as obviously getting their children back.
Yeah, it's not really clear what the officials at the ceremony were talking about. It doesn't appear that any major security announcements were made. On the previous day, on the day of the girls' release, President Buhari had announced a no-fly zone across the whole of Zamfara state. He'd also said mining activities in the state should cease until further notice. And these measures were supposed to help curb the insecurity. There's also been an announcement of a heavier military presence in Zamfara, but it's not clear how long that will last.
And it's obvious that there are a lot of people who are angry, first and foremost, the families, that why the authorities are showing no empathy with the fact that when your children have been released, the first thing you want is to grab hold of them, not to sit in a ceremony listening to all these officials. What have people been saying?
Yeah, especially because, the girls had been in the custody of the state all day Tuesday, so all the day of their release. Many of them hadn't had a chance to see their parents, and, it's been 5 days that they've been taken away and gone through the most traumatic thing that could have happened to them. So there's a lot of frustration, a lot of anger that this is happening again. We saw similar scenes in Katsina in December when 300 schoolboys were taken there. Many of them were kept, in a ceremony in the state capital, Katsina City, meeting dignitaries, having their pictures taken. This is an incredibly traumatizing time for children, and to go from being, in a forest held by gunmen to suddenly in the custody of the state and be paraded in front of cameras often feels a little bit tone deaf.
And also, finally, Mayeni, just briefly, what are people saying about what this actually means about Zamfara and how banditry is now taking over? Because we still don't know if money exchanged and that's how these people were released, especially when you hear the president saying they're not giving in to this kind of blackmail, and yet days later these girls were released and no other details.
Yeah, there seems to be a bit of a tussle between the federal government, or the central government, and state governments as to how to deal with this. President Buhari released a statement on Friday saying state governments need to stop giving financial incentives to these criminals. Some see it as a commentary on the governor of Zamfara's strategy, which has been to help what he calls repentant criminals by giving them some financial rewards in exchange for them stopping their kidnapping activities. But at the moment, state governments and federal governments are all struggling to deal with this problem, how to stop kidnappers from taking children in order to get money.
Mayeni, thank you very much indeed. Our correspondent, Mayeni Jones there.
Tuesday on the BBC World Service, and when you're not listening to your radio, you might well have seen Love Island, the reality TV series which has been franchised all over the world. It puts
The S2 key is missing. On the desk, the stairs down on the open page. Yes, that's it. I'll tell you what, Beverly, I'll leave the deal entirely up to you.
Up to me? Gil, that's not fair.
Why not?
But suppose she turns out to be a lemon.
I don't think she will, because you're going to have the job of training her.
Oh, you certainly flatter me.
Not in the least. Oh, good morning, Lucia.
I just realized what time it was. You'll be leaving in a few minutes.
Yes, it's 9 this very minute. Step on it. More coffee, Beverly?
No, thanks. How do you feel, Lucia? Oh, better. Much better. You better eat something. No, I can't.
At least some coffee.
Yes, I'll have some coffee.
I've got to run. See you later, Lucia.
Yes, Gil.
And I'll see you this afternoon at 2, Beverly.
Yes, I'll meet you in town at 2. Oh, Gil, don't forget Lucia's medicine.
No, I won't. Bye, Lucia.
Are you meeting Gil in town, Beverly? Yes, he wants me to decide on that filly he's interested in. Where did you learn so much about horses? Seems to be natural. Why don't you get interested in horses, Lucia? Why should I? What are you interested in? Well, I am interested in a few things. My husband in particular. You don't act interested in anything. Well, if you'll take my advice, you'll snap out of this coma and get some pep. Does Gil like women with pep? No man cares about a woman who sits around and moans. I think you're a hypochondriac. Do you? You should do something about it. I intend to. I intend to do something about it. I'm glad to hear it. Get out, do things. Play games, golf, tennis, swim, and ride. Even if medicine will fix you up. You know all about it, do you? What is it? Oh, I don't know. It's a tonic, a builder-up. I wish I could believe that. But at least you can try it. Won't hurt you. No? I wonder. Oh, come in, Dr. Handy.
Well, Lucia, why did you call me out here? What's wrong?
I just couldn't make it into town.
Oh, it can't be as bad as all that.
Did Gilbert talk to you about me yesterday?
I saw Gil for a few moments at the club during lunch. Said you were run down.
Did you give him a prescription for me?
Oh, never do that until I've examined the patient.
You didn't give him a prescription.
Well, no.
What did you suggest for me?
Oh, I don't know. Mentioned a few tonics he might get for you. Spoke of beef iron and wine and sherry and egg and... oh, I don't remember what else.
And you mentioned nothing specifically.
I don't think so.
I see.
No. What seems to be wrong with you, Lucia?
I don't know exactly, but something has been happening to me that, well, frankly, I'm afraid I'm losing my mind.
We all feel that way at times.
I'm serious. Things happen to me in the night.
What sort of thing?
At first, I thought they were just nightmares, but when you have a nightmare, you wake up and the fear is gone. You realize the truth. But this vision that comes to me haunts me through the waking hours as well.
Vision?
Something, I think it's a person, comes through my bedroom door, comes toward my bed with outstretched arms as though it intends to strangle me. Each time it comes a little closer, and my fear is that eventually it will get to me before I wake up.
See. You always dream the same dream?
If it is a dream, yes.
And who's the person?
I don't know.
You don't think it's really a dream?
No. I think it's a premonition.
I mean, what are your basis for such a fear in real life? Is there someone or something that you're afraid of?
Doctor, I'm convinced they're not dreams, that I'm not asleep.
Oh, none.
I'm positive they're not mere dreams.
Well, I think it's all due to your run-down condition. You probably don't sleep as soundly as you should, so you transfer sounds in the night to dreams at night.
That's exactly what I mean. If I'm only half asleep, I may be transferring actual movement and sounds into dreams. In other words, if someone slams a door in the night and attributes it to a dream.
Yeah. Oh,
But then perhaps I'm not dreaming, don't you see?
I think you'd better come into town and have a thorough physical.
You mean a checkup by a psychiatrist?
Oh, I may have someone help me. It's the usual thing, you know.
Oh, Dr. Andy, I'm so frightened.
Now. Everything's going to be all right.
I'm afraid that I'm going to die. That someone is trying to kill me.
You're not going to die. That's ridiculous.
I'll call you and make an appointment.
That's better. Very well. In the meantime, try not to think about it. Keep your mind on the brighter side.
Yes. I'll try.
All afternoon and on into the evening, an awful gnawing of jealousy and fear occupied every moment. Gil and Beverly. How could they do such a thing? And how far will they go to get you out of the way, Lucia? Will they stop even at murder?
It's 20 then.
Are you asleep, Lucia?
No, I'm not asleep.
How are you feeling?
I seem to have developed a headache.
Have you eaten anything today?
No, I didn't care for anything.
Well, this will help you. Better take a dose now. I'll measure it for you.
What is it?
Why? It's the tonic.
Did Dr. Hanley prescribe it?
Yes. Yes, he did.
Where's Beverly?
Down in the library.
Did you buy the horse?
Yes, Beverly thought she was a fine animal.
I didn't know Beverly knew so much about horses.
She's a horsewoman after my own heart.
Is she?
Rides like the wind, too.
She had intended to go home tomorrow. She's staying on?
She's got to. I wouldn't think of her leaving now.
Why not?
Well, for one thing, she's going to train the horse.
And what else?
Why, nothing else. Here, take this. It's a little bitter, but you'll get used to it.
Gil,
Go ahead, it won't hurt you.
I don't want it.
And why not?
It has poison in it.
I suppose it does have a little, yes.
What?
But only enough to act as a tonic.
I don't want it. I won't take
Are
it.
you going to act like a child? Take it and quit arguing.
I won't.
Take it, swallow it down.
I can't take it.
You're impossible.
I'm afraid.
You need this medicine, but you're so confoundedly stubborn you'd rather sit around and mope all day. Very well, there it is. You can take it or not. I'm disgusted by the help you put out of this. Good night.
No, wait, Gil. I'll take it.
I don't care whether you do or not.
There. I've taken it. Terribly bitter.
Well, that's more like it. Now take another dose around 11.
Gil, where's Mrs. Benson?
Why, I told her she could have the night off. But you might like to spend the evening in town.
You let her off?
Yes, she's been sticking pretty close lately.
Yes, she has. Good night.
Good night, Lucia.
What's wrong, Gil? You look upset.
I am. Lucia didn't want to take it.
No? Why not?
She's afraid of medicine.
What are you going to do?
She finally took a dose of it. But if I know her, she'll never take another drop.
She's got to take it, Gil. You've got to figure out a way to make her take it.
It can't be disguised. It's too bitter.
Try something else.
I'll try and coax her into it again.
Is there something that tastes more pleasant or something you could put in milk or orange juice?
I don't know. But I'll find something.
Of course you will. You've got to.
She's... Wait a minute. There's someone listening outside the door.
Oh, sir.
Well, Benson, what are you doing standing here in the dark?
Why, I was just going upstairs to see if Mrs. Durant wanted anything before I went out.
I see. By the way, I'm staying home for a couple of days, and I thought that since you've been staying so close to the job, you'd welcome a few days' leave.
Leave? Why, yes. But Mrs. Durant need prefer that I stay.
I think you'd better take a little rest yourself. You needn't come back till Friday.
But I don't need a rest.
You come back Friday.
Yes. Very well.
But that night, for once, the good Mrs. Benson disobeys orders. A few minutes before 12, she returns to the mansion. No lights are burning. So she makes her way quietly through the back entrance, slips up the stairs, and taps lightly on Lucia's bedroom door.
Mrs. Durant? Mrs. Durant?
Then she turns the knob, opens the door, and snaps on the light.
Mrs. Durant, are you here?
Then Benson steps quickly toward the bed. The bed is empty, and a horrible sight meets her eyes.
Oh, blood. Blood all over the bed. Oh. Get me the police department.
All right, Mrs. Benson, now just calm down and tell us what happened this evening.
Well, earlier in the evening, Mr. Durant told me that I could have the night off since I'd been staying close to Mrs. Durant for some time. And then later he said he decided to let me off until Friday. I didn't want to go, but he insisted.
Was there anyone else in the house?
Yes, Mrs. Durant's half-sister, Beverly.
Did you leave the house?
Yes, but I sneaked up the back stairs and told Mrs. Durant I'd be back about midnight.
If you had till Friday, why did you come back at midnight?
Because we were both frightened.
Of what?
Well, Mrs. Durant had been having premonitions that someone was trying to kill her.
Who was trying to kill her?
She didn't know, but she was terribly frightened.
Is that all?
No. Her husband tried to get her to take some medicine he had brought home. She refused, and he got angry.
How do you know he was angry?
I heard him talking about it to Beverly. They were in the library. And he told Beverly that Lucia was stubborn. Beverly said that he'd have to think of some other way.
Did Mrs. Durant suspect her husband and Beverly of trying to do away with her?
Yes. Yes, she did. She was convinced that Mr. Durant and Beverly were in love and wanted her out of the way.
I see. Mm-hmm. Well, so you came back tonight because you anticipated that something was going to happen.
Yes. The house was dark, so I came up the back stairs, knocked on her door. When I got no answer, I came in, turned on the lights, saw she was gone, and then I saw the bed all covered with blood. She wouldn't take the poison, so they did it another way. That's what they planned in the library.
Where are they now? Any idea?
Well, they didn't expect me back tonight, so they're probably gone to dispose of the body, intending to come back here and clean the place up later.
I see. Anybody else know about Mrs. Durant's fears?
Yes, she talked to Dr. Hanby. I called him right after phoning the police and told him about it. He knows.
Dr. Hanby, Captain Blake, what in the world is the meaning of this?
From all indications, Mrs. Durant has been murdered and the body disposed of. Doctor, I understand Mrs. Durant told you that she was afraid that something was going to happen to her, that she was going to die.
Who told you that?
Mrs. Benson here.
I see. Well, she did call me in this morning. She'd been having strange dreams. Premonitions, she called them. I called them hallucinations.
What do you think it was?
She couldn't tell whether it was a man or a woman, but someone was always approaching her bed with outstretched arms, trying to choke her.
Do you think it was more than a dream?
She was a sort of hypochondriac. I asked her to come into town where I could give her a thorough examination. I didn't take her story too seriously, but this certainly puts a different slant on the entire picture.
Yes, we haven't found the body, but I have men out looking now. We'll find it.
There's Mr. Durant and his sister-in-law. I found them about half mile down the beach.
Oh, how are you, Durant?
What in the world goes on here? What's wrong, Doctor?
Take a look at that bed.
Good Lord. What happened? Lucia. Where is she?
We thought you might enlighten us on that point.
What do you mean? Where is she? Is Lucia dead?
Oh, Gil,
What happened?
We think your wife has been murdered.
Murdered? But what are you doing here, Mrs. Benson? I thought you were gone till Friday.
Why did you tell her to go until Friday?
Why, I thought she needed a rest. She'd been having long hours. Where is Lucia?
Where have you and your sister-in-law been?
Why, I slipped upstairs and saw Lucia was asleep, so we decided to take a little ride down the beach. It was still early.
Mm-hmm. Didn't take anything with you?
Certainly not.
what do you mean by that? What would we take?
I don't know. I just asked. Did you two try to get Lucia to take some medicine?
No.
Wait a minute, Beverly. That won't do any good. Yes, we did. Lucia was run down and needed a tonic, but she refused to take medicine.
Why did she refuse?
I don't know.
Maybe she was afraid of being poisoned.
Poisoned? Why should I want to poison her? Lucia was my wife.
How long has your sister-in-law, Beverly, been here with you?
Well, I don't know. Quite some time.
Just a minute. Are you inferring that Gil and I...
I'm not inferring anything. I merely asked you a question.
But Gil, tell him that...
Just a moment, Beverly. Mrs. Benson, what have you been saying? What did you tell them?
I told them the truth.
You think I planned to kill Lucia? Is that it?
Yes, you and this woman.
You're out of your mind.
You tried to get her to take some medicine. She knew you were in love with her sister and that you were trying to poison her.
And how did she come to that conclusion?
She had premonition.
That means nothing.
And besides, I heard you talking, you and Beverly, planning the whole thing.
What?
She's lying.
I heard you. When you realized Lucia wouldn't take the medicine, Beverly said you'd have to think of some other way.
Some other way to what?
To get rid of her. To kill her.
There must be some... Dr. Hanby, you know better than this. Do you think I had a reason back of wanting to know about various medicines? No, I didn't. Not at the time, but now... Now what? Well, I'm sorry to say it all adds up to something suspicious. Seems more than just coincidental. Do you think I killed Lucia? Look about you.
Winter started
Look at the
right
room.
now, a million years
What else am I
ago,
thinking?
they explored.
What was the tonic you tried to give your wife?
It had strychnine in it.
Is that right, Durant?
Why, yes. It was one of the things Dr. Hanby mentioned. It was iron, quinine, and strychnine.
Did you mention that, Doctor?
Well, I suppose I did. It's a commonly known tonic.
Did you add anything else to it, Durant?
Certainly not.
How about it, Sergeant? What's the report?
The bottle contained iron, quinine, and strychnine, and a heavy content of arsenic. Arsenic? But that isn't possible. I put nothing in it. Where would I get arsenic? It was in there just the same. Good heavens. Doctor, this isn't true. You know it isn't. I hate to say it, Gil. But the evidence looks bad for you.
Benson knows what this is all about. She's lying. She knows Gil wouldn't do such a thing. She's back of it all.
Why?
I don't know. But believe me, I'll find out if I have...
That'll do. Under the circumstances, I think you'd all better come down to headquarters so we can keep you separated. Come on. And no more talking.
After 48 hours of relentless grilling, endless questioning, Gil and Beverly are released on a writ of habeas corpus. Weeks go by, and Lucia's body has not been discovered, so the district attorney makes a public announcement that no murder charges can be preferred against them due to lack of corpus delicti, the failure to produce the body, Lucia's body. Then one evening, Beverly and Gil talk in the library.
Beverly, I want you to know how wonderful I think you've been. You've stuck right beside me, never lost your nerve, and, well, you're one girl in a million.
Oh, thanks, Gil, but it isn't over yet. They won't stop their search for Lucia's body, and if they find it, we haven't a chance.
I know, but what can we do about it?
Well, why couldn't we leave the country?
Together?
Not necessarily. They'd be sure to follow us. But we could go separately in different ways,
And meet someplace later on? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I mean.
It seems a bit mad. It would be equal to an out-and-out confession.
Oh, but Gil, if they find Lucia's body, we haven't a chance. It's too strong against us.
We could never come back, Beverly.
What of it? I don't want to die, Gil. And I don't want anything to happen to you.
Beverly, I don't know what to say.
I'm frightened, Gil. I can't stay here with such horrible fear hanging over me. I'll go mad. If you don't go, then I will. I'll leave tonight.
Please, Beverly, I need you more than ever now. Please don't go.
Don't worry, Gilbert. She won't leave you.
Lucia.
Heavens, Lucia.
I won't let her leave you. I'll see that you both go together and stay together for a long, long time.
Lucia, what?
Lucia.
We thought you were dead.
Disappointed, aren't you?
Where have you been?
What are you going to do with that gun?
You thought I was dead, but I'm not. I'm live enough to pull this trigger. I've been hiding for weeks, and I've been behind those curtains for the last 20 minutes. I heard every word. Now I know you're in love with each other. Now I know you wanted to do away with me.
In love? Beverly and I?
From the day she came here, she took you away from me.
I did not.
We never thought of such a thing. Never.
Never is it our mind.
Why lie about it?
You let your imagination run away with you, Lucia. You're insane.
You think so? Well, if I am, it's your fault. Yours and Beverly's. You've driven me insane, both of you. I had a plan to get even with you, to make you pay for what you've done, but it failed.
What plan?
You see, I didn't know about the law of corpus delicti, but I do now. And this time there will be a body. Two bodies. Yours and Beverly's.
You're a suspicious-minded devil, Lucia.
I planned to trap you on a murder charge. My murder. But it's going to be your murder now.
You were convinced that Beverly and I were in love?
Of course. I never needed a dream nor a premonition. I cut myself and smeared blood on the bed and disappeared. When I found they couldn't touch you without the corpus delicti, I came back to kill you.
Lucia, you fool, you vicious-minded fool. I'm going to tell you something. Then go ahead and shoot me if you will. Lucia, not until now, this very moment, has the thought of loving Beverly ever occurred to me.
You never loved Beverly?
No. But I can tell you this, Lucia. Now that I've seen you as you really are, I could never love you again, never.
Gil.
Wait, Beverly.
But I was sure, I was convinced that you and Beverly were...
You were sure only because your warped, jealous mind convinced you that there was something between us.
You mean
You certainly made a sorry mess of your life, Lucia.
Then all I've done is killed your love. Oh, Gil.
Yes, Lucia. And you've no one to blame. No one but your own miserable self. Lucia, don't, Lucia!
Oh, Gil. Gil!
Yes, Beverly. But it's probably the best thing for her and for us.
show closes in fear and trembling, starring Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's Mary Astor. Tonight's tale of suspense. The broadcast originated in Columbia Square in Hollywood. This is your narrator, the man in